Hi everybody, this is Maya Good, and this video is on diversity both in Booktube and in books. And I will say that this is a topic that's come up pretty annually, like clockwork on Booktube. Periodically, this topic comes up. It tends to cause a lot of problems. People write a ton of response videos, and it can get a little crazy. And so I've never done my own video on the topic just because I've had issues on YouTube and my other channel in the past, and I love non-drama YouTube. So it's taken a lot for me to go ahead and do this video, but I've been thinking a lot about this topic, a lot. I recently watched a video by Francine Simone, and I rewatched a video by Brown Girl Reading about white authors writing about the Black experience, which was really timely because last month for the Literary Roadhouse Book Club, they read Underground Airlines. And I was going to read it, but I didn't get around to it. I just had a lot of stuff going on. And one of the things that came up during the book discussion was a white author writing about this Black experience. And so, given the conversation with Francine and the many videos of booktubers saying they want more diversity in their books, and then the problems with white authors writing the Black experience, my thoughts on the topic of diversity are a little complex, and I wasn't sure if I could do a video on my thoughts on it. So I'm going to try to approach this in a systematic way, and the video is probably going to be long. It might be a little rambly, but just stay with me. At least try to. So first I want to talk about diversity on Booktube itself. When I first started watching Booktube videos, it was a very specific demographic. Almost all the booktubers were really young, like under 25, and they were all Caucasian, either from the US or the UK, and they were pretty much all female. There was a handful of guys, but not very many. Since that time, Booktube has gotten a lot more diverse. I see young men, some excellent young men doing amazing Booktube videos. A lot of the younger members of Booktube do read a lot of YA, but I'm starting to see a lot of younger booktubers that are reading literary fiction, classics, even poetry. Then we're seeing these new booktubers who are older. When I first dabbled in a video here and there, I really latched on to booktubers like Climb the Stacks because there weren't that many booktubers who were out of college, and that was as close as I could get to someone a little closer to my age, although she's still young. But now I'm seeing booktubers in their 30s and in their 40s and in their 50s and even in their 60s, which is amazing. I'm seeing much more diversity in gender, both in male and female, but also, people with ambiguous genders, people with various sexualities. I'm definitely seeing represented in Booktube. And I'm seeing a lot more diversity as far as race in Booktube. I'm seeing booktubers from lots of different countries now, Booktube channels that are not in English. I've run into Hispanic channels from South America. And I'm seeing a lot more Black booktubers, especially Black women, which I'm surprised it took so long because Black women in the U.S., as far as demographically, read more than just about any other demographic. So I feel like the diversity problem on Booktube is self-correcting. I actually don't think it's a problem. I think as time goes on, we're going to see more older booktubers, both as the young booktubers from 5 years ago get older, but also as their parents and as older people are watching these channels and saying, you know what, if Steve Donahue can make a channel, then I can make a channel. So that's all stuff that's correcting. I'm not really worried about diversity in Booktube as far as booktubers themselves. Diversity in fiction on Booktube is a little more complex because I liked what Francine said, that when we really enjoy a book, we don't really pick it apart. We don't say, oh, this book needed this many Black people and this many lesbian, gay, trans people because we're in the story and that what we're really asking for are good books. I thought that her line of thinking was really interesting and something that I hadn't hadn't really occurred to me. For me, diversity in Booktube, diversity in fiction is necessary because it's a reflection of life. Fiction is a reflection of life. And when we read fiction, our brains don't separate. Our brains don't separate that experience that we're having as we're reading the book from the experience we would have if we were living the experience. And so through reading, we develop our skills in empathy and social relations. We start to understand other people's cultures. We widen our language. We become less judgmental, I think, through reading widely. And that's something I think we need right now in society. Look at any news article, crime article, politics article, and scroll down and read the comment section. I don't think there's a lot of empathy going on in society as a whole right now in the US, but also problems elsewhere. There's a lot of segmenting and separation and blaming and pointing fingers going on right now. And so having lots and lots of diverse characters and diverse books that open your eyes and help you feel other people's experiences will go a long way to correcting that socially. So for that reason, I think it's important. I also think it's important because, when I was a child, I didn't see diversity in books. I saw diversity in TV. I grew up in the 80s and I was watching a lot of reruns from the 70s, and 70s TV had a ton more diversity than TV now, in my opinion. And it frequently was less politically correct, but because it was less politically correct, you were allowed to make mistakes on your way to finding really important and interesting thoughts. And so we had comedians like Richard Pryor, who nowadays wouldn't be allowed on stage. I think in my experience, in order to have deep and meaningful conversations about race, you got to get through a lot of BS and a lot of confusion and a lot of self-protection and saying the wrong thing on accident and asking stupid questions. And if the only time you're allowed to talk about race is if you do it the right way, then it just doesn't happen because everyone's too afraid to open their mouths. So I feel like in the 70s TV, there was a lot more diversity, and even in characters, you'd have characters like Archie Bunker, who was complete racist, but then the show was exploring really important themes that was beneficial. So, I feel very torn on it in many ways. I want to see more diversity because I recognize how crucial seeing that diversity in TV was. And I remember reading I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings for the first time, and for the first time seeing a protagonist that looked like me and had hair like me and was going through this experience, and it just sucked me in. And I want to know that there's lots of diverse fiction out there. It doesn't need to be in every single book, though. And that's where I bristle. And I bristle as an artist. Because as an artist, we write the stories that come to us. We write the characters that come to us. And if you've grown up in an all-white area and you're writing fiction, most likely you're going to write mostly white characters because that's what you know. And if you try to write characters of color and then you write them wrong, what happens a lot is what Brown Girl Reading was talking about, when white authors attempt to write the Black experience and they do it in a way that's inauthentic and offensive on accident, and it's because they don't have that experience. And so I don't think that every book has to be diverse. I feel like the real issue is diversity in authors. So you'll find white authors who have grown up and have close friends with a highly diverse community, and they will be able to write characters of these different ethnicities because they have those experiences. But for many authors, they're worried and they're concerned. Now I'm starting to ramble because I'm trying to get my thought process out straight. In my experience, I'll just put it this way. I've been on a website for authors, and I have seen so many threads where a young white author was saying, I'm writing this book and I have these characters and I have a gay character or I have a Latina character and I'm scared I'm going to write them wrong. What should I do? And in the end, they end up turning the character white because they're afraid of doing it wrong. Or they're told, go ahead and write the character, but critique it with a lot of people of color to make sure it's right. And even if they do that and they get anything wrong, then they're criticized and considered racist for writing this Black character and using tropes and offending Black people because it wasn't an authentic character. So what do you do as a white author? Do you acknowledge you don't have the experience to write this character and you write a bunch of all white books and then you get criticized for writing all white books? Or do you attempt to write diversely and then you get criticized for writing people that you don't know? You get criticized for having Chinese characters that act Korean or Black characters that act like a racist stereotype because you are only filtering what you've taken in. So if you're taking in Black people on TV and the characters on TV have issues, guess what's going to come out in your fiction? Many of the same issues and tropes that you've been taking in through media, which goes again to the need for more diversity in media so that all writers will have the tools necessary to write more diversely. But that's a different topic. So there's that issue. But it's not that simple. You can't just say to a white author, well, if it's too hard, don't try. Or say to a white author, well, you can't write Black people. Just stick with what you know. Because artists, they have a story inside. And when you're an artist and you see, I see problems happening in the news every day. And guess what? Some of those problems make me want to write short stories or novels that I think are important. And I'm not the only one seeing those problems. People of many races are seeing those issues and being inspired to write these stories. So I don't think we can say either way. If you want to write characters of color, you want to write other genders, other sexualities, do it. Try to do it well. If you don't have the tools to do it well, it's okay to not do it if you're not comfortable, is what I'm trying to say. So what do we do to solve the problem? The way to solve the problem is to somehow get people to read more diversely, to get more writers of color and more writers of various different diversities published, to have more diverse people in publishing itself. But also, and this is the hard part, if readers don't read those books, then those writers don't get published because the publishers are businesses. And just as the statistics are that little girls will read stories about little boys, but little boys won't read stories about little girls, the statistics on reading styles are that Black people will read everybody, but white people tend to shy away from books with a lot of Black characters or with an author that is known to be Black. So we're fueling this. Like when you look at Booktube and you look at your TBR and you realize you've only read one person of color last year, and maybe you've only read one book in the past couple years that had anybody in it that was gay, you're part of the problem. And that's hard, and it's something that everybody has to look at. I look at it, when we pick books for Literary Roadhouse Book Club, we try to read very diversely, and periodically we will look at what we've been reading and realize we've been reading way too many women, or we haven't been reading any people from South America, or we haven't been reading any Asian authors. And we try to make a conscious decision to read outside our normal everyday experience. So as a writer, what is all this? Moths. I'd rather moths than fire trucks and musicians. So we're just going to go with it because it's been crazy here today. As a writer, I have issues with being able to write. I have considered writing under a pseudonym because my voice is kind of unique and doesn't really fit. I write books and stories with extremely diverse characters, but they aren't, how can I say this? I was raised in a situation where I didn't know any Black people until like high school. And at that point, the kids didn't want to talk to me. I didn't grow up with adult Black men. I didn't grow up with any Black women. I grew up around Hispanics. I grew up around a lot of people of varying sexualities, but I didn't grow up around a lot of Black people. And it's something that I've taken a concerted effort as I've grown older to connect with that part of my heritage and to understand it better. So when I write Black characters, my Black characters are very conflicted about their identities because I can't write the Black experience from the viewpoint of someone who's grown up around a ton of Black people. I can't write that. I didn't live it. My experience was being the only Black person. And so when I write Black characters, my Black characters tend to be much more conflicted, much more racially ambiguous as far as culture. They do not necessarily have quote unquote Black culture because that's something that I don't understand. And I'm still trying to figure it out myself. When guys try to pick me up when I'm outside, a lot of times I don't even understand what they're saying to me just because I'm still learning. It's like a second language to me. A lot of my characters tend to be Asian, tend to be Latino. A lot of my characters, like Past, I have a white woman who grew up white and later on finds out that she has Black heritage. These are characters that I get. That conflicted nature is something that is inherent in all of my writing. It is my version of Stephen King's Drunk Dad, okay? Like every single story deals with identity and figuring out who you are on some front. So when I think about being published, I run into the question of, where are they going to put me? If they try to market me as a Black writer, I'm not writing the type of books that fit in on that shelf. I'm writing books that don't really fit anywhere. Would it be easier if I had an ambiguous name? Would it be easier if I came off male? Would it be like, how do I market myself when there's this idea that unless you've lived it, you can't write it? Because in some way, my characters are going to be going through something that I haven't done. You know, we don't say to somebody, oh, you can't write aliens because you've never been an alien. You know, so when I write a male character, I've never been a man. So when I write Black characters, I write them in a way that makes sense to me, in a way that rings true and honest and makes them full people. But it's not the Black experience that a lot of people think Black writers should be writing about in order to help that particular social problem, because that's not something that I experienced. It's not something I understand. And if I did it, honestly, it would come off as if a white woman was writing about it. Like if I wrote about a bunch of inner city Black kids dealing with drugs and violence, it would come off as if a white woman wrote it. Just because I don't have that experience, I don't understand it. I could write about someone who didn't have that experience going into that situation. So for me, as far as my own writing, it's about recognizing who I am and approaching these important topics in a way that honors both my characters and myself. If I know that I'm not capable of writing a character, if I know that no matter how much research I do, it's going to come off false, I'm not going to write that character. But if I know I can write that character, I'm going to. So when if I write a story about white people, then Black readers, and they know I'm Black, then Black readers are going to say, how come you're not writing about Black people? And you see what I mean? It kind of puts me in this catch-22. Like, who am I allowed to write about? So as an artist, I think it's about authenticity and writing whatever story comes to you. And if as many artists of different ethnicities and genders and financial backgrounds and countries get published, then we will have diversity in books as a whole. And then we just got to get readers to read them. So I know that I didn't explain this topic well, and it's because it's something that me personally I'm grappling with. Periodically, like every 6 months, 8 months or so, I go back and I think, is Past the best first novel for me to publish? Because if I publish that novel, is it setting up expectations of what all my future novels are going to be? Or should I publish Rimiji and Rising, which is about an Asian man and a Latina woman, and then back it up with Past be my second novel, so that I can kind of set up that expectation that I'm not just going to be writing about Black people. I'm not just going to be writing about white people. I'm going to be writing about really diverse, culturally ambiguous people. And so, that's kind of, a problem for me. It's an issue of like, how am I going to get marketed? How am I going to get shelved? Will I be accepted as a Black author? Will I? I don't know. I would like to think there's room for me. I know that I've had experiences that other people have had. There's more than one Black experience. And I think that there is value in having that conflicted, multicultural experience out there. So, when I see people say, you needed to add a Black person, you needed to add this, you needed to add that, my first thought is, if they did it, they might do it wrong. So we really shouldn't demand that of people. But at the same time, it also is to look at the person that's saying that and look at their TBR and see, just how many diverse authors they've actually read. If you're only reading white authors, then you're complaining because those white authors aren't adding people of color in their books. Maybe you should read some authors of color as well. And then at the same time, I'm okay with authors attempting to write important work and maybe not getting it all the way correct. The Help is a perfect example. It's a good story. It wasn't perfect. It had problems. It had some stereotypes in it, but I acknowledge the fact that it was a good story. I acknowledge the fact it sucked me in. I'm not mad at the author for trying. I'm not mad at the author of Underground Airlines for trying. I'm not the only, Black people and people of color aren't the only people seeing the cultural issues that we're having in the world. And artists tend to want to write about things that are important to them. So if an artist, a white artist, sees issues in the Black community and feels compelled to write that, I think there's room for it. And maybe when people read that book, then they'll want to go and read other books by people who are of color. So, for me, the whole issue is very confusing and very ambiguous and very gray. Just like the rest of me, I tend to be on the fence on many issues just because I don't see things in black and white as far as like this is the right way and this is the wrong way. I think diversity is really important, but I think we have to be careful of what we demand of artists. And I think we have to recognize our own culpability. And I think we need to realize that the problem is a lot bigger than what one particular writer does. And it's much more important. It's industry-wide. I want to see lots of writers on a shelf of all different colors mixed up and not segregated on different shelves. I want to come onto Booktube and see lots of books out there by lots of writers from all over the place. I think that's really the only way that you're going to have diversity, because people are people and artists are people and people write what they know. It is the way of the world. So that's my video. I'm sure I'm going to have to do a follow-up because like I said, my thoughts on the topic are very up and down, just because it's a complex topic. It's not something that has an easy solution. But if you want to contribute to diversity in fiction, the best thing you can do is to read diverse fiction. And on that note, ciao.